quick. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Housing, Land Use, Environment, and Transportation Committee meeting of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors for today, March 15, 2018, scheduled for 10 a.m. We'll go ahead and get started a few minutes late, thanks to the chair. Let the record show that Vice Chair Wasserman is also present, so we do have the quorum, and we'll move on to public comment. As usual, this is an opportunity to speak on items that are not on the agenda but pertinent to county business. And we do allow up to 3 minutes when we have 5 or fewer speakers. It appears that we have 2 requests to speak. We have 1? Others, all right, only 1 under public comment, so it is definitely a 3-minute limit. I know the speaker is familiar with the rules, so we'll go ahead and call up Scott Largent. Welcome. If there's anyone else who does want to speak on items not on the agenda today under public comment, please approach the podium after Mr. Largent is done. Bye.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, supervisors. Today, I figure kind of right place because we're, today, later we're discussing some of the transitional housing for motorhomes and cars, and I know that's on an agenda item later in the meeting. What I brought in with me today was just to kind of give an example of what a lot of the homeless people have to deal with that might be living in a motorhome, might be living in a car. They'll end up at our parks, of course, maybe near our airports. What I'm trying to show here is the harassment and intimidation I went through with my motorhome. I know it's been a little time right now. San Jose Police Department came out there. I had valid a temporary operating permit. So what they did is they said, we'll tag the RV, and this is a chronological report, and it goes through there with the officer's information. We are familiar with Scott Largent. We will tag his motorhome. Now, the process for tagging something like that is a document like this one right here. I'm able to obtain now blank documents of a lot of this stuff. It's very helpful of the people that are helping me with the cause. This document right here should be called into dispatch. And it should have the officer's badge number, the time, and it should also appear on this chronological report. None of this stuff showed up for my motorhome. I had also, when they towed my motorhome, they have a document that I don't know if you guys are familiar of. It's a CHP 180 form. And they're supposed to itemize the contents that are in your vehicle. Of course, the officer never did this. And in my situation, I lost everything I owned. So I have been pushing up on the different agencies to properly fill out forms like this, because I shouldn't have to lose all my stuff, and neither should homeless people. Then we get into the hustle that they created around the Super Bowl, which is temporary operating permits. They stopped giving out the 1-month permit about 6 months before the Super Bowl began. They wanted to clean up the streets. So since I was out there helping people fix their motorhomes, since that was kind of my hustle, I realized a way through the DMV to get 1-day permits like these. And we would get 5 or 10 from the nice ladies at the DMV because they realized people were struggling. All San Jose PD or any of the 13 cities have to do is take this document, pull it out the window, and there's no triplicate system. Bam, they got that motorhome. And that was their hustle. And last year they took 390 motorhomes. The year before that they took 300, and I believe 290 before that. No one was able to obtain their property. I keep pushing up on the San Jose Police Department regarding the police report. It doesn't say anything about searching my motorhome. It says I'm laying on the sidewalk, foaming at the mouth, said I was high on methamphetamines, and I wanted to go to jail. And it included 1 officer and not the 24 officers that were there searching my motorhome looking for something for 4 hours. So it's really fishy what homeless people have to go through when they lose their property. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for your attendance today. We'll move on to item 3, which is our consent calendar, modifications to the agenda. Supervisor Wasserman, recommendations on 3?
Thank you, Chair. I'd recommend that we add items number 4 and 8 to our consent calendar, which already includes items 11 through 15.
4, 8, and 11, 12, 13, 14, 15?
Yes.
That's an agreed upon consent calendar and modified agenda.
All right.
So we'll move on unanimously with that. Item 5 then is the next item on the agenda. So if you were here, in case you're here on any of the items we just called off, Those were just approved as part of the consent calendar unanimously. So there will be no further discussion on 4, 8, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I just want to be clear about that. Item 5 is a semi-annual report from the Office of Sustainability relating to sustainability and climate action programs for the period October 17th through February 2018. Welcome. While they're getting set up, let me just remind folks that this is the form you should fill out and make sure it gets to the clerk if you want to speak on any of the remaining items. And we typically establish a 2-minute speaking maximum for items the rest of the way in terms of public comment. We're back to our panel whenever they're ready.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry for the delay.
It's all right.
Thank you. It's nice
If
to
you
be
have any
here.
good jokes, we can deal with those first and then get to the PowerPoint.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's nice to be here before the Hewlett Committee again. So, I'm Susan, for the record, I'm Susan Gilbert Miller, Director of the Office of Sustainability. I have to my immediate left is Mr. Kevin Armstrong, Interim Manager, Office of Sustainability, and to his left is Ms. Susanna Mercado, who is the Sustainability Manager for Facilities and Fleet. We have before you today, there were actually 3 items before you today. Thank you for putting item 8, the environmental stewardship goals, onto consent. I think that the semi-annual sustainability and climate action report covers the same information, so it'll all get covered. So what you have before you right now from us is 2 additional documents. The Sustainability Master Plan Framework, which comes after this. Actually, I'm going to turn this off for just a second. Can you do that for me, please? Thank you. And the Semi-Annual Sustainability and Climate Action Report, which is this particular item. With the Semi-Annual Sustainability and Climate Action Report, the first part of that is the Facilities and Fleets report on the internal progress being made on the environmental stewardship goals and the status of operations and projects. And the part 2 of that report is the Office of Sustainability's report in terms of what's occurring with community partners to advance the board's sustainability goals and also their climate action policies. So if you would like me to present on that, I'm happy to do that, or I can take any questions on the semi-annual report.
Yeah, I think the report is well done and self-explanatory. As you said, we kind of had a couple rounds of reporting on this particular agenda. More of a process recommendation than anything, and that would be that it's kind of a trade-off. Instead of a semi-annual report, I'm going to more of a dashboard style report, which I think will, reduce the, in one sense, reduce the work on your side in terms of having to write so much narrative or even present so much narrative, unless we, need it. But we can ask for that on a case-by-case basis, and we can just deal with Q&A. If we have a basic dashboard report quarterly, I suspect it'll end up on consent a lot of the times, and information that's needed to back up that dashboard can just be requested by the supervisor's offices, either here or those that are scanning the agenda from the other offices, from our colleagues' offices. So again, kind of a trade-off. I don't know how all of you feel about that, but a little less paper, but slightly more frequent reporting here on this particular report.
Yes, I think that actually falls right into alignment with the Sustainability Master Plan framework, and so we can touch on that too when I get to that part of the agenda. I did want to mention, in response to the last Hewlett Committee meeting, based on your comments, Supervisor Cortese, about wanting us to look at other ways of potential anaerobic digestion, we took that into account, and we're looking at that. It doesn't necessarily, won't necessarily work for the county to do something on a large-scale commercial basis, but this April we're going to be visiting, I think it's Prospect, Silicon Valley, to look at a small-scale anaerobic digestion testbed type of technology. So we'll take a look at that. And in response to Supervisor Wasserman's comments about wanting to have some kind of tree map inventory, we are actively looking at 3 different types of tree mapping software at this time to evaluate which one of those would work best for county needs.
Okay, great. Just kind of an announcement on my part, but to share with you, and just in the spirit of transparency, but also I think there can be some communication as follow-up. When I was in Washington, D.C. Earlier this week for transportation issues with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, I had the opportunity to schedule a meeting with the Climate Reality Project, the director and the manager
Great.
there, and which is essentially funded by Al Gore's foundation.
I almost wore my green circle this morning,
Oh,
to be quite honest.
great.
Yeah.
They're next. I went there to ask them to consider playing a greater role with counties. For
Yes.
example, Bloomberg has organized cities around the Paris Accord response. We have taken on the responsibility through the Board of Supervisors at my initiative of trying to organize the counties similarly. And the Climate Reality Project would like to assist with that. I found out by dropping in and talking to them. But they're also very interested in seeing what they can do with counties on the implementation side, particularly on the 100% renewable side, to try to build greater coordination, synergy, perhaps funding opportunities. I expressed to them, of course, that I would connect them with you, and I realized I could have done that offline, but we happen to have this subject in this meeting today, and I think it's always nice for my colleagues in the general public to hear when something's fresh off the press like that. So I can share the contact information with you off agenda, but it would be great if you could follow up with them and just touch bases with them. They're going to be doing later this year a convening of about 2,500 individuals in Los Angeles in their attempts to move more aggressively in this direction and help local governments move more aggressively in this direction. I expressed to them we've done an awful lot here, and but there are always challenges to implementation that perhaps you could share what some of those obstacles are with them here on the ground.
Absolutely. So I feel like you're inside my head, which is, or maybe I'm inside yours. I don't know which.
That could be scary for you.
Yeah,
So.
it could be. The reason why I say that is just before, the week before starting here with the county, I was one of those individuals who went through the Climate Reality Leadership Training. And at that time, in anticipation of coming here to the county, I actually approached them and asked them would they be willing to come out and work with us here at the county. And at that time, they agreed they would be interested in that. So for me, it's been more about a sense of timing. When would be the right timing, given that we have before us this project in terms of creating the Sustainability Master Plan? And
I think they're looking for, sort of some insight now into what we're actually dealing with, especially given that they may play a greater outreach role with us on the Climate Coalition in order to try to get other counties involved. They have a nationwide database. We do too, but they they have a little different, people have a little different reaction when they're contacted by the Climate Reality Project versus a peer county. And so we're just talking about double teaming with them on outreach so that we can make even more progress. I think we have 9 or 10 partners now, and
Actualizing the county's endeavors in this area. And so with this, you're being asked to both receive it, and also there's a number of recommendations in addition to that. So there's approving of consolidated reporting of the environmental stewardship goals. You're talking about a dashboard at this point, so these recommendations may change somewhat based on what you're requesting right now. But this idea of having a schedule for us to provide you updates, and then also to give you updates both on the sustainability master planning process and also on the environmental stewardship goals and what's happening in terms of programs. I will tell you at the FGOC meeting, they have requested off agenda monthly reporting on the progress on the rollout of the Sustainability Master Plan framework. So I would want to know whether or not that was of interest to Hewlett to also receive those same status reports off agenda.
yeah, I think what I'd like to see, and we'll hear from Supervisor Wasserman in that regard, is if they've requested that. Typically, when there's a request like that from one committee, the distribution will go to all the supervisors' offices, which means we would get the monthly report anyway as an FGOC item. But then to have as part of our quarterly dashboard process, whatever you think is appropriate to cross-reference what you've been reporting out monthly. It should be more or less a cut and paste, I would hope. But I think just so that, because here, even though all those off-agenda reports are public documents, this is our opportunity, at least quarterly, to make sure members of the public have an opportunity to see what's going on in a public meeting, and also allows us the opportunity to do what we've been doing today and have two-way communication with you in public. So I think that would be good. Any objection to that? I don't want to make it redundant for you.
No, there's no objection. I think I would recommend that if we're going to a quarterly type of dashboard, it's going to take some time to actually create that type of dashboard reporting. There's many components that go into that. So that may be something that would be a part of the sustainability master planning process, but would not actually be able to be fully implemented until toward the end of that process.
Okay, well, let's do that. Let's attempt that. Let's keep that in the parking lot to begin toward the end of that process, and we'll revisit at that time whether that belongs there or not, belongs with the quarterly reporting dashboard system. But let's go ahead with the monthly off-agenda reports.
Yes, sir.
For this framework. So they would just go to everyone on the Board of Supervisors, correct?
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to so the last recommendation, which would be for action, would be after you've had any questions you have about the Sustainability Master Plan framework, to have it recommended forward to the Board of Supervisors for the first meeting in April. And so with that, would you like me to answer questions, or would you like me to do a brief presentation?
Yeah, why don't you go into the brief presentation, and then we'll circle back. I didn't come in here with any objection to the April recommendations to the board, but we haven't heard.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, your overview yet. But having reviewed the paperwork, I for one had more concerns about D and E and not A, B, C, and F at this point. So why don't you go ahead and give us the overview, and then we'll come back to, we'll see if we have any public comment, and if not, we'll come back to final direction.
Thank you very much. So if you'll kindly indulge me a personal comment in terms of the picture you see before you of the image of the blue marble which came to us from NASA. I love this picture because to me it shows both our connectiveness and it also shows our fragility. It's very much what the visionary architect Buckminster Fuller called Spaceship Earth. And throughout the 70s and the 1990s, we've done a lot to be able to work on cleaning up polluted air and rivers and managing hazardous wastes and looking at what we're doing in terms of our ecosystems. But right now, as you know, we're facing a totally different level of threat in terms of extreme weather events and climate change. And that, I believe, challenges us to a completely new level of cooperation and coordination with each other to figure out how we can, through innovations and collaborations, help to address these issues. I've really have seen during my life what we can accomplish when we work together. And I think as a county, if we're setting our sights on our shared vision and shared goals, that we can really move forward in this. California has always led this nation in terms of environmental stewardship and in terms of the many components of sustainability, which is both the economic and the social indicators, social justice pieces of sustainability. And Santa Clara County is definitely helping to lead California, which means leading the nation. So today I'm proposing to this committee a sustainability management framework that aims to create not just a plan that ends up sitting on a shelf in some way at the end of the process, but a actual framework that creates a process for being able to implement the programs and initiatives to help advance sustainability and climate defense within the county. The framework that I'm proposing, in order to start to be able to communicate to employees some like mnemonic key ideas, key concepts for sustainability, I looked at what I felt that the county was already really doing and had this idea of foresee the county of Santa Clara's sustainable future, where the 4 C's are community, which is meeting the present needs without compromising future generations; compassion, care about making our community sustainable; competence, for every employee to learn to become a sustainability practitioner, because that's really what it's going to take; and cutting edge, which is a hallmark of Silicon, where we sit, Silicon Valley and the county of Santa Clara, to innovate and improve sustainability and climate defense, to keep looking for ways that we can keep doing this better. So when I first got here, I stepped back and said, well, what has the Board of Supervisors already said in terms of the vision for sustainability? And what were the goals and initiatives that have already been set for this county? And the vision that I found that the Board of Supervisors had communicated was this idea of a healthy, it really goes back to the original definition of sustainability, a healthy environment that includes a safe community and a vibrant economy, and looking at issues of social equity so that we're meeting the needs of today, but we're also allowing for the community of tomorrow to be able to meet their needs as well. So with that as a vision, looking at the various components that the Board of Supervisors has already adopted over time, the environmental stewardship goals, the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, the various policies set by the board manual in terms of sustainability. And then within that, I think there's many other things that would fall into this in terms of, especially including, for instance, the social equity indicators and economic indicators, but also looking at what departmental goals have already been created to advance sustainability and initiatives at the departmental level. Whatever are the county's legal and other types of requirements that are incumbent on us to fulfill, and then looking at areas where there might be gaps within the department, and also in terms of working with our external partners, if there's gaps which we could be identifying that would potentially become future recommendations for the Board of Supervisors. And to do that, we would really look at the activities and the goods and the services that the county is involved in to figure out where there might be gaps. So here's the big picture of this framework. It really is based on this Deming's type of model of a management system. There's many different types of management systems. To my knowledge, I don't know of anybody who's ever actually done the full 3 components of sustainability within a management system before. I have heard anecdotally that perhaps some corporations have been looking at trying to do something like this, but I'm suggesting that this is really how we approach looking at sustainability at the county, and starting with a planning process which brings into it all of those items that I just mentioned, the vision and the policies, the goals that have already been set, and walking the county departments through a process of identifying what would be the objectives or targets for programs, which are really kind of these interim goals along the way that we can set to achieve, so that we can do what you would ideally, I believe, like to see, which is be able to show progress against the ultimate goals that we're trying to achieve in some type of a frame, in some kind of a dashboard type of process. And then moving from that planning phase, which ideally would be phased so that it would help the departments be able to really figure out what they might need as they move into their budget processes. And moving to that, to looking at if there's new programs being developed or there's old programs that are already happening but are not achieving the improvement that ideally you would like to see, that we look at how those are being resourced in terms of an organizational structure, who has these roles and responsibilities, what staff resources are available to implement them, and what type of financial resources are available. And then that includes making sure that all the employees are aware of what the goals are that we're trying to achieve, and being able to communicate that both within our county but also with our partners, external, our community partners. Within that, there's a need to look at how do we make sure that we're achieving those objectives and targets that have been set. So there's a certain element of operational control that might be necessary to look at, and whether or not people have the right training for what they're being asked to do. And then we move into this process of actually monitoring and measuring for results. So that gets right to the heart of this idea of a sustainability scorecard, and also regular metrics that we know that we're tracking to see how we're doing on improvement, and also tracking on these programs that are intended to achieve these goals to see whether or not those programs are on track and we're getting the actual improvements that we're hoping to get from them. The whole point of monitoring and the whole point of reporting is to be able to look at it and see whether or not there needs to be any adjustments. are we actually achieving what we need to be achieving? And if not, what do we need to correct to try to get us on track with that? So the checking process flows right into a review process. The review process would happen both at staff levels, but also at a director's level, to look how departments are doing on these different goals. Now, I've explained a lot in terms of the internal processes. The same type of idea would be we would try to recreate that to some extent with our external partners. We don't obviously, we can't have the same idea of necessarily the organizational structures and so forth, but we would bring together our external partners to have the conversations about how we can harmonize what we're doing within the county and what are the priorities that the different partners like the cities are working on to see how we can leverage each other's activities. So this slide is really intended to show you more of kind of inputs and outputs. So from this idea of, you know, this looking at the vision, the goals, the policies, and all these things, we come up with this idea of what are the programs that are being done to implement that and have specific objectives and targets to achieve for those programs, and then make sure that we have all of the support in terms of the employee staff support to be able to actually implement those programs, and then be able to monitor and measure how we're doing against those programs and in terms of achieving our goals. And this was a recommended schedule. It's actually quite aggressive because this is a big county. There's a lot of things going on. We don't have, within my department, a complete sense of everything that is going on that relates back to sustainability. So part of this process is also to just try to get a good sense of what all the different departments are doing and how we could coordinate better and leverage each other's expertise. The beauty, I would say, is that just the very act of starting to put forward this idea of a process, I've already noticed increased communication and collaboration occurring. The schedule here, my goal is to try to get through these different, the Plan, Do, Check, Act process so that we're set up in time for next year's budget cycle. So as we go into next year's budget cycle, people have a good idea of what resources they might be looking at to advance sustainability. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions that you have.
Just one quick one before you take the slide down and before I turn to Supervisor Wasserman. So it seems, I heard what you said earlier about quarterly reports on the framework would probably make more sense toward the end. But wouldn't it make sense for this committee, just to get the quarterly reports on this progress reporting in the meanwhile? Wouldn't that, it just seems like that would coincide with our quarterly sustainability reports. And I get the, one is a process report, this, and the other is obviously a more substantive report on progress. The dashboard that we talked about earlier under the earlier item. But I'm just looking at this. At some point, you're going to be telling us, yes, we've achieved the planned progress prior to the review of the draft sustainability master plan? No? This committee I'm talking
I want to
about.
make sure I understand your question, sir.
I'm just saying, when are you going to come back? That's all.
Oh.
I'm hoping you're not going to go away until 2019 and then come
Oh,
back.
no.
As aggressive as this is, and I realize it's going to come quickly, it just seems like there would be sort of a dashboard on progress that's
Correct.
given to the committee.
Absolutely. So the recommendation, which was the original recommendation put forward with this item, was that there would be quarterly reports to this committee on how we were doing with the implementation of the Sustainability Master Plan framework. And in the second quarter, we would do a semi-annual review of where we were at with the environmental stewardship goals and the programs, the status of programs that have already been being reported to you to date. And then at the end of this process, in the fourth quarter, we would be coming back with more of an annual report, which at this point, when we would have a better handle on what was occurring throughout the county, we would give you a more robust report on how we're doing in terms of the environmental stewardship goals and the status of programs that are intended to achieve those goals. So where that recommendation was revised in FGOC was that they also requested, in addition to those reports which I just mentioned, that we do a monthly off-agenda status report on the Sustainability Master Plan framework rollout, so that they know on a monthly basis just how this work is progressing.
Okay. I understand that, and I understand we asked for quarterly dashboards earlier on the goals. I'm just trying to make it easier on you that you synchronize the reports to this committee on both items. So you only have to be available perhaps on some of those meetings to be here and see if we put it on consent or see if we're going to have questions, but not have to be here every month. We'd have the off-agenda reports. I was worried that these reports to the committee might get out of sync with the other reports, if that makes sense. I'm trying to keep them synchronized.
I understand. Well,
and it's less, honestly, just it wouldn't matter to me so much either way. If you say that's a bad idea, I'm really just asking if that doesn't make sense. That's all.
I do believe it makes sense to do at least a quarterly report to this committee. Absolutely.
All right, Supervisor Wasserman.
Thank you. I appreciate, I too don't have the need for it to be here each meeting, so the quarterly is headed in the right direction. You made a comment, Susan, where you said the importance of partners, and this truly does take a village. I appreciate everything you've done. I looked at this item here, went over it with my staff, and to me it was kind of a plan to create a plan, a plan for a framework, if you will. And this is the first step towards that becoming a reality, and then you go do your thing and involvement with all the other departments. But that one comment where you talked about involving other partners, collaboration, okay, we're the county, we're not one of the 15 cities, we've got parks, we have facilities, we have unincorporated area, all areas that we have control over and can do sustainable type items and take sustainable type actions. But a whole lot of this county is not under county governance, if you will. Also, a whole lot of this county produces a lot of the things that we're concerned about sustainability-wise that are not produced by the county. The open space, the unincorporated areas, the parks, et cetera. That's not doing a whole lot to hurt the environment. So I appreciate what the effort you're all leading here at the county, working with department heads to be as conscientious, environmentally friendly, sustainable, whatever the term du jour is. And I thank you for that, but I also encourage you to continue what you referenced, which is talking with 15 other cities, the other organizations, VTA, the Water District, all the others, because it takes all of us being on the same page, and then I think we can have an effect.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So to that effect, I just should mention there was a meeting with cities and the water districts yesterday to talk about how we can move forward with some of the initiatives already started by the county.
Thank you. And VTA, of course, with the transportation and all,
of course,
a lot of environmental effects there. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. If no other questions, we can start dealing with the actual recommendations on this one. I think we've discussed enough to sort of have a meeting of the minds on how we're going to handle the reporting and what we're going to do with the FGOC reports and so forth. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think we can just possibly move these recommendations, Supervisor Wasserman, and just say as modified by any of the additional direction.
If you're making that motion, I'll second it, or I'll make the motion, whatever you prefer.
Let's just say we're going to move forward 6A through F with the additional clarifications made by the two supervisors on the committee today.
Second, thank you.
Okay. All right, and we don't have any public speakers on 6. We do have one when we get to the next item. That's a unanimous agreement, and that concludes the item. Thank you very much. Appreciate the interaction today. Item 7, this is Code Enforcement Status Report, collection of proposed uses of administrative citation fines. I know that was something that we kind of left hanging some time ago in terms of when the idea when the changes came forward to sort of create a potential fund. So
Yeah,
yes,
I'd like to
yes.
start. Chair
Yes,
Cortese,
Mr.
Supervisor Wasserman, Kirk Gerard, Director of Planning and Development. So we'd like to deliver our report to you in two parts. The development of the community restitution account came with your board's adoption of a whole host of reforms. And we did leave it in a state where we would determine how much money might be available in the community restitution account over time. We decided to do a small pilot to test the use of those funds, and then come back to you with a report on the possible long-term strategy for the reinvestment of community restitution funds. So Mark Ruffing is going to provide the first part, just to give you a status of how we've done with the reforms that your board implemented in 2016, and then we're going to end with a discussion on the possibilities for the CRA. What we're after is a recommendation from you on a report that we'd be presenting to the full board, suggesting how we might implement reinvestment of the community restitution account in fiscal year 2019. Thank you.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Good morning, supervisors. Get this mic adjusted here. So you have the report in front of you, and rather than going through a long laundry list of everything that we've done lately for you, we've been pretty busy, as you can see from the report. Quite frankly, this has been an amazing process, and I'd like to actually call out several different partner departments and agencies that have been very important partners in this process for us. So you see all the work that's in the report that we've been able to do the last 2 years or so. In particular, I want to mention County Council. You probably will note that there's a large amount of fines that have been collected over the last 2 years. Our focus has been on compliance and on really digging in and implementing this new program model. And with the assistance of Michael Rossi and his team with their legal expertise, we've been able to really get at some of the most notorious and egregious cases to address those and get them finalized, and there are fine components with them. In addition to that, I'd also like to thank folks in the Environmental Health Department. We've had a number of notorious cases over the last year. Even when they did not have an active ordinance code that was part of the investigation or the enforcement action, they stood tall with us out there doing the enforcement. So I really want to acknowledge that effort. We're also reaching out to other departments, and most importantly, I would like to thank our staff. This is a very different program model from what we had before I got here. And we had a lot of heavy lifting involved in moving from the old program model to something that was more focused on results, and which is measured and a thoughtful approach to doing that. So other than that, I don't feel like I need to do a laundry list breakdown, but if you have particular questions, I'm happy to answer those for you, or to engage in that discussion about how do we complete the cycle of life with all the fines that we've collected to get those monies back out to the communities as we've intended. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know if we had a speaker card on this or not.
We
Chair.
do, yeah, that would be a good idea. On item 7, Trina Henniser. Please come on up. You'll have a couple minutes to address the committee on this item.
Good morning, Hewlett Board and County staff. I just want to let this committee and code enforcement staff know that we have been very aware of the changes that have been happening, and we really appreciate the constructive and systematic way in which they've made the changes, especially in South County. Addressing the unpermitted and unsafe properties over the last 2 years has been really significant for us. We also really appreciate the fact that we're engaging for the San Martin Neighborhood Alliance with the code enforcement on the potential pilot programs to continue changing South County from blight to beautification is really our goal. So we really appreciate all that's been going on with that. And on that note, we also wanted to make sure to share with you that we really appreciate Supervisor Wasserman's joint efforts with working with our community, and we want to publicly invite all of you to come to our next Trash Bash, which is on March 24th, and it's going to be held at the Sig Sanchez building. I'm going to leave some flyers on the back there for anybody who wants to come out and join us, because it does take boots on the ground, and code enforcement is doing a lot of that, and so it's really wonderful to be a part of it on the different side. And I also want to point out that you guys have done an amazing job hiring Mark Ruffing and the staff that he's been joining on to the county, because it is truly making a difference and it's evident to South County. So we really want to encourage you to continue to support and provide him with whatever it is that he's requesting, because whatever is happening in his department is working. So thank you.
Excuse me 1 minute. Through the chair.
Yes.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Trina, why don't you
Trina?
come back up for a second?
I
Supervisor
just
Watson,
wanted to publicly thank you for your leadership in the San Martin Chamber of Commerce, the San Martin Neighborhood Association, the traffic, talking about collaboration. You've really helped bring people together for the common good, which is beautification, the getting rid of blight, but also community pride.
Yes.
And people working together, both the businesses through the chamber that you established and through the individual residents. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
anything else, Supervisor?
Thank you. I didn't know to say Mark and Michael or Ruffing and Rossi, or it sounded, I was thinking about that. Anyway, I want to thank the two of you too. I've been the District 1 supervisor obviously for 8 years, and the blight that existed there, that it was so hard to do anything about, was so very, 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 very frustrating. I know when a property, when I manage it, when it gets tagged, I've got a letter from San Jose a few days later, and boom, do it, or we're coming out and doing it, and we're sending you the bill for the paint, and blah, 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 blah. And for us, for whatever reason, we have a lot of land, and rural and unincorporated, and whose fault and whose responsibility and who everything else. But the last couple of years, the difference that you two have made working collaboratively together, your department, and focusing on I forget what you called it, the main offenders, whatever terms you used earlier, atrocious, whatever you want to say, blight. There's been a lot of public feedback that I've received that have noticed, they might preface it, finally you're doing something about it, but the reality is we're doing something about it, and it's because the two of you and your departments. So thank you very, very much. I will make one comment, Chair, the direction that they're looking for from us, and that would be regarding the funds. that have been accumulated thus far. As much money as that is, it goes very quickly once you decide to spend it on something. On your package page 112, also called page 5 of 6, also called page 7. So I don't know which of the three numbers you want to call that. But the second paragraph talks about the department has also initiated discussions with the Office of Supportive Housing. And then the second paragraph talks about other uses of CRA funds. Are you with me on that? These funds are the result of abatement of blight and public nuisances, and I think should be put back in the system to continue fighting blight and public nuisances. As focused as we are on housing, these dollars will go nowhere as far as providing new housing. However, you mentioned a little tweak about using them towards substandard housing violations. I'm interested in learning more about that. Off agenda, next report, whatever works for you. I just want a connection, a connectivity between the origin of these dollars and what they're used for. Okay, I don't want to get these dollars from this, and no offense to the Sheriff's Department or roads or anybody else, and hire another. You see what I'm saying? I want them to stay in the department. They came from this. I want them to go towards making things better. And if you decide that we can use those funds to address, and I'm quoting your words, substandard housing violations in order to correct the violation and allow the individual to stay there and not create another homeless individual, I like that. So that's one supervisor's feedback there. If, on the other hand, that money all goes towards one project or two projects, I'm not so crazy about that. I would like it to see it benefit many different. So that's what I'm looking for. You're bringing back to us was a recommendation where it can stay in the same area that it came from and show as big a benefit as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm not entirely clear, both from a process standpoint and just a recommendation standpoint, what happens next. So I say that with great appreciation for the support, and Ruffing, Rossi, and Gerard.
Yeah.
Law firms work here.
Yes.
Which one doesn't fit?
So,
I can provide some clarification if you'd like.
I mean, it would seem like if we're going to do something with money, the Board of Supervisors as a whole needs to weigh in on that, even if it's just a consent item. I'm not suggesting it should be. I remember the board being quite interested in having a lot of individual ideas about what should happen. And let me just say, going in, I tend to agree generally with Supervisor Wasserman about the reinvestment, and I like the 4 items that you talk about here now that I've seen them. I don't think I would have thought of that back in 2016, that these investments need to be made still. We're not out of the woods in terms of investing in the program internally before we start trying to do good works externally for other people. So that said, process-wise, and what would you like to see?
Excuse me if I may, just for clarification through the chair. My intent was that they bring back recommendations to this committee.
Before going to the
And then you and I give direction, which then goes to the board for approval of expenditure of the funds.
Okay, that's fine.
My cough.
And the 4, how does that, let me just, Kirk, just before we go on, so I can get clear from Supervisor Wasserman, it'll maybe help inform your comments as well. On 4 of 6, Supervisor Wasserman, page 4 of 6, the page about a couple paragraphs before the paragraph that you cited, it says the hotline went live in May 2017. Possibilities for additional investment in the program include community publicity and promotion, creation of a mobile app, expansion of the program to include graffiti reporting and abatement, and provision of contracting services for summary abatement, litter removal. So should they, based on if you were...
Those are good for me.
Okay, that you want them to come back to this committee within that framework with more detail as to specifically how they would invest?
Yes,
I'm fine
because they
if that's
mentioned those 4, and they also mentioned the other 2.
Yeah.
And so what I'm looking for is a specific recommendation.
Okay.
Just my point was keep it in the same subject matter.
Yes.
All right.
That's all. Thank you.
Back to you.
If I may, our intent was to lay out these possibilities, but we do have a recommendation, and then I'll describe how the recommendation could be implemented. I think that Supervisor Wasserman said it well, that we see blight as an area that is a core focus of the code enforcement program. So reinvesting in the community in areas that are proactively dealing with blight, which could be, and this is a program that you championed, we have piloted the illegal dumping hotline and implemented it with the first installment of funds we received. It was $50,000 in FY18, and that was our pilot. We'd like to expand that program because it's complementary to our effort at combating blight and potentially the new urban blight ordinance that we're bringing back to your full board. So that's one. We would like to develop a program that uses some amount of the funds to combat blight. And a part of it would be the illegal dumping hotline, potentially the illegal graffiti hotline, and then the cleanup, the community cleanup days that we're piloting with the San Martin Neighborhood Alliance. So recommendation one. Recommendation two is another area that we see often is a very painful part of our job is it will come upon a substandard housing condition. We do have tenants. The tenants effectively are victims of the situation, and we want to be able to work with Office of Supportive Housing cooperatively like we have in the past to, in this case, work with homeowners that are earning less than 80% of the median income and complement the county's existing home rehabilitation program. With our funds, we could either expand the eligibility for those funds or provide a grant loan combination, but incentivize the homeowner to immediately make the repairs and sometimes keep tenants in place. We can describe the outline of that program to you, and those are our two recommendations. It's blight and the substandard housing condition as a companion to our existing home repair program. Now, the mechanics are we would bring to your full board in the form of a supplemental budget resolution with no impact to the general fund, because all we would show is that we'd be withdrawing monies from our community restitution revenues and then spending at a certain rate in FY19 on these two programs. And if you, I mean, your comments today seem like you're okay with that general direction, we would come for a supplemental budget request to the board to implement the program.
So let me just do an initial response, which isn't going to go anywhere today because we're going to bring this back anyway. But I'm very good with the 4 items, as Supervisor Wasserman said he is as well, where it says use of administrative fines on our page 4 of 6, or 4 or 6 of the memo, I guess is what it is. Where I'm a little unclear is not in other areas is like the supportive housing support, additional support in those situations and circumstances, and expanding additional cleanup days is whether the sources and uses are right, not whether or not we should be doing that.
Okay.
For example, I would say more community cleanup days are a really good thing, especially in those larger unincorporated areas. We all seem to have some in our district, and I certainly have mine. We get cleanup days out there now. But there are ways, of course, to leverage the contracts that we have with the haulers to help us with that. And I think what Supervisor Wasserman was saying is we kind of have to go scale to scale, apples to apples on scale here. It's a big county, and if we really want to expand our cleanup program, which would take some pressure off of the dumping and the blight, of course, if we give people legal and easy ways on a Saturday morning to get rid of the stuff they want to get rid of, they might just go there. I guess that's the idea. But the scale, I'm not sure, is appropriate for the amount of funds that we have here. Likewise, the housing, I do think that there should be very close coordination between the departments, as you just described, in those circumstances, so we aren't creating homelessness inadvertently as we enforce. But whether or not I wouldn't want this fund to get drained, or some of these other 4 areas, because we've taken on, a tiger by the tail. And I thirdly and lastly, I just want to say, so those 2 areas were my 1 and 2 that I'm a little concerned about, and I think Supervisor Wasserman is as well. But we can hear more from you next time, and maybe you can turn us around on that. The other fundamental concern I have, and I think I said it a few minutes ago, is I think we need to scale up the hotline and these community publicity and promotion, however that's done. And if we can find cheaper ways of doing that, if we can bootstrap on ways, correspondence that's already going out to members of the public, other programs in the county, if there's ways to kind of lessen the cost of that, maybe it frees up money to do these other larger scale, big ticket type things with some of this money. But I'm not convinced yet. I'm pretty unconvinced that people on Carruthers Road or Upper Elm Rock Avenue in my district or along Quimby Road in the unincorporated area even know, this hotline access yet. They don't know that yet. Somehow we need to become more ubiquitous than it is, and it's just not even there yet. And there's lots of ways to do that, some of which don't cost money, but require us every time we're at community meetings, making sure sheriff's deputies that are interacting with people are sharing that information. I mean, that's really the San Jose model currently with their mobile app, and I think they've been able to scale it pretty quickly and sort of make it pretty ubiquitous. I forget how many. I just heard a report last month at a community meeting I was at where San Jose was present, and they talked about how many hits they've had on their mobile app just in a 30-day period. It was just an enormous number, and that happens from this information from this item 1 here, basically, whether it's done by bootstrapping or whether we actually have to pay somebody to help us market. So perhaps what I'm saying is there's a point down the road where we've accomplished a lot more on 1 through 4 where I think we start just saying, hey, we've got money now that we don't need for marketing and promotion, and we don't need for some of these other things. Is that starting to build up a reserve that we can use, to use as kind of a heavy hitter reserve for big ticket items? That's my thinking going into our next meeting.
Yeah,
Supervisor?
it's an excellent
Thank you.
direction.
Let me be brief and more specific, just to what I said before. No, not than I was before, not than you. The items 1 through 4 on page 4 of 6, I'm in favor of those 4 items, as well as pursuing a pilot cleanup initiative with the San Martin Neighborhood Alliance. The items on pages 5 and 6, I think we'll get a lot more bang for our buck on the items on page 4 than those others. So that funding substandard housing violations would be last. I'll just be straight up. It'll be last on my list as far as priorities. I would like County Council to let us know perhaps if Measure A funds, based on what we said on the ballot, can be used for such violations to help preserve housing and prevent homelessness. That would be separate. But I believe, Supervisor, you and I are on the same page with the items recommended on page 4 of 6.
So I think we're in agreement that, come back with them. I
Yeah.
think Supervisor Wasserman hit on something there that may be a way for you to go,
No question.
in terms of at least trying to meet this committee's priorities is maybe one of the possibilities as to how to approach the longer term accumulation of dollars is saying all these things are good, but prioritize them and sequence them in terms of what we're going to deal with first.
Yes.
And what money should be available for what first. And maybe that would help shape the conversation here as well as at the Board of Supervisors later. And if people want to argue that the housing one should be one and the community publicity should be last, we can finish that discussion at the Board of Supervisors. But at least you're hearing, how we would sequence the rollout of that money.
Thank you for such clear direction. I think we'll come back to your committee with an outline of the 1 through 4 plan for FY19 and a pilot that we think we can manage. I'll mention 2 things. One is these monies don't accumulate. These are revenue funds that need to be budgeted on an annual basis. So we'll just reflect a budget and allowance for FY19. And then in subsequent years, we'll take a look at this priority set in relation to the other items that are possibility and look at an FY20 program. But I think that would be a good incremental approach. And if your committee is generally fine with that, we'll come back with the supplemental item that we'd be bringing to the full board.
Yeah, I'm not sure, again, you guys, you can all look into that later. It's a different kind of a legal question, whether or not the board can't rebudget whenever, whatever it wants, ultimately in the budget process anyway. But I get what you're saying. The idea from your perspective is dollars in, dollars out, and not to be building up a big reserve that rolls over each year.
It's effectively just a revenue account as opposed to a fund established in the county budget. Now, we, under agreement with Office of Budget, we are keeping track of the total revenue over the years. So we could report to your board that over a period of, say, 3 to 4 years, this much revenue is collected, and you could consider that in any request for general fund contribution to the program in subsequent years.
Okay. I'm clear enough for now until we meet again on this. Supervisor Wasserman, do you want to just try to state what just happened? We're receiving the report and giving the direction that we indicated.
Yes, thank you. Motion to receive. I think staff has taken notes on the direction that has been given to bring back to us a proposal, prioritized, suggested proposal for expenditure of these funds. And I think the funds are going to go down each year. I think the initial funds that you've got now were because you went and attacked a lot of issues that existed. And I hope historically the funding goes down because the blight goes down. And I'll leave it at that.
Supervisor Wasserman, this is Steve Mitra, Assistant County Counsel. Just a clarification on the referral you just made, or the HELOT Committee is about to make to County Council. I want to clarify that what you're asking us is to see if Measure A funds can be used as a partial funding source for qualifying low-income properties to rehabilitate homes to address the substandard housing violations. Is that correct?
I am interested in that, if that's something you can bring back at the same time. If we have to handle it separately, but I think there's a relationship there, and it's certainly a question that I have. Is that doable?
We can do that. We'd probably do it as an off-agenda confidential memo, but if that's okay with
Fine.
you. All right.
Is that fine with you, Supervisor?
Yeah, off agenda, as long as it helps inform the department as well as to what they can and cannot do in that regard.
Thanks for the clarification.
I know the simple rule is it's for acquisition and development, but there may be a creative way to structure those kinds of rescue operations as rehabilitation or as acquisition and development of some kind. So I would like to have that report.
Yep. We'll look into that and get back to you then. Okay.
So Supervisor Wasserman's motion plus the request for information from council is adopted unanimously. So thank you all for the ongoing hard work. We appreciate it. We look forward to hearing back from you with all your good ideas on uses of funds. Item 8 was put on consent. Item 9 is Parks and Recreation item having to do with the Marshall Cottle Park Community Garden proposal. And I'll pause here just to apologize for not having introduced everyone on the dais like we usually do, but that was in the interest of time because the chair was late for the meeting. So, Rob, do you want to say anything from an overview standpoint?
Good morning, Supervisor Cortese, Supervisor Wasserman, Rob Courtney, Director of Parks and Recreation. As you know, the Marshall Cottle Park Master Plan called for the development of a community garden as part of the services that we provide to the community there. And we've been working for some time now to incorporate your direction, that of the full board, to reach agreement with the City of San Jose on an agreement that would support the joint development and operation of that community garden. We have an agreement that's acceptable to the staff of both agencies, and we're pleased to present it to you today. At the dais, our two staff, will let them introduce themselves, and we're happy to provide any more information or answer any questions you might have.
Don Rocha, Deputy Director with Parks.
Tim Heffington, Principal Real Estate Agent with Parks.
Yeah, thank you. I know a lot of work has gone into this over a lengthy period of time, and I think we need to conclude the item by moving it forward to the Board of Supervisors and seeing if the board has any other feedback on it before notifying the city that we have an agreement. I had a couple of just concerns going in that I kind of want to ask about, and just depending on how I feel about it after you answer the question, reserve judgment about Supervisor Wasserman, if I can do those, I'll turn to you immediately thereafter. One of them is, and maybe this is an issue of, of legal interpretation, but the portion of the agreement, which is, I think this is agreement page, starting at agreement page 9 of 21 and moving over to page 10. It's just a sign approval under E, small letter E, that paragraph.
Sorry, Supervisor, which page are you on?
I'm on the agreement itself, which is towards the back of the, that's probably back, that's not toward the back of the packet.
Is there a package page at the bottom that
It doesn't.
I've got one?
See, joint development operational agreement, so it would be package, oh, it just says 9A at the top of the page.
Okay, I've got 9As, multiple,
131 packet page.
131, thank you.
Mine doesn't have the packet pages marked on it. But anyway, so that's the beginning. Are you at the beginning of the?
Yep.
So if you moved, so it should say 1 of 21 at the bottom of that page. Oh.
You don't have package?
Well, if you can kind of flip through about to approximately page 9, yeah. Operation standards, if you can get on that page.
Package page 134?
And they
Okay,
go,
I'm on
and they go down to the bottom where it says sign approval.
Yes.
And it says city and county shall collaborate and jointly approve any signs to be placed in or around the garden or anyone else that refer to the garden. Which I'm having a little bit of trouble with, only because when you get to the last sentence under F, which is on the next page, it says county retains sole naming and branding rights over the garden. So it feels like we have, a conflict in provisions there, because presumably if we're going to put a name on the gardens, meaning we, the county, and we're saying we want sole rights over that, but we have to have signage jointly approved by the city, with the city, doesn't that immediately vitiate our naming rights? It's just a legal question. It just seemed to me as I'm reading along there that if I was the city and I didn't like the name the county came up with, I'd say, fine, you can name it that all you want, but you're not going to put it on a sign because we have the rights to approve the signage, which in some sense, a name without a sign is just a big secret to the community. So I'm just having a concern about that. And I don't need it. If it's something that needs to be opined about legally as to whether or not those two are in conflict, we can hear about that when it gets to the Board of Supervisors. Or, again, off agenda, if it can be cleaned up or clarified with the city somehow. I just want to make sure. I think probably it's possible the intent originally was in terms of markers, and interpretive signage or something along those lines. Here's where the tomatoes go, here's where the cucumbers go. But the other point I'm making, I think, still could be a problem, even if that was the intent originally. And if you have an explanation, that's fine.
Thank you, Supervisor Tim Heffington. Following Board of Supervisors' direction during our discussions with staff, we added another sentence to the section you're referring to, and I'll just read that sentence. It says, city signs on county property will conform to county sign standards developed for Marshall Cottle Park.
I'm sorry, through the chair, where are you referring to?
That is on page 9 of the agreement, the very last sentence under section E, which continues on to page 10.
Okay.
And the city signs on county property will conform to county sign standards developed for Marshall Cottle Park and must be approved by county in advance of production. So that is our approval and veto mechanism to ensure the signage follows our standards.
Yeah, I would just question, again, I apologize for, bringing in my own legal practice experience as a transactional attorney doing real estate agreements, but I still say you have a problem when the very first sentence says city and county shall collaborate and jointly approve any signs to be placed in and around the garden or anywhere else that refer to the garden. I'm just telling you, you got a conflict when you come back later and you don't eliminate the word approve and you say those signs will conform to county sign standards and must be approved by the county in advance for production. So what provision, which approval trumps which approval? I mean, it's just, again, I'm trying to avoid writing an agreement that leads directly into conflict here as to who has approval rights, because if I really wanted approval rights and I was on their side, I would say, the first sentence there is what I'm hanging my hat on.
This is what I would suggest is that I think we understand what the concern is, and that perhaps we can go back and be more clear with respect to the intent of our language and understanding the concerns you raised here.
Yeah, and then from my perspective, city and county shall collaborate and jointly design any signs to be placed in and around the garden with final approval coming from the county would make a lot more sense to me. It's this word approve in the very first sentence of E that I'm having trouble with, that first use of the word approve. All the rest of the words, use of the words approve work well for me because they all tend to be consistent with the county's approval of standards, with the county's naming rights and so forth. I wouldn't want to deny the city the opportunity to work with us collaboratively on any of this, including, giving their input into the design and so forth. They may want their logo on something or something like that, given the joint nature of the project, and they may want to say that, but I don't think they should be able to force it, given everything else that these paragraphs say. So, if you can clarify, I guess I don't want to kick this again to come back to the committee, because it's been a long time, that it's been on agenda waiting for resolution, and so much of the rest of this seems to be all resolved. If it can be worked on in between now and getting to the Board of Supervisors and just reported out there as to how it was resolved, I'd be fine with that.
The administration can do that.
Thank you. Chair Cortese, I threw you to the staff. I understand the legal point he's bringing up with those two phrases, perhaps conflicting. Is it your understanding in your discussions with the City of San Jose that there is clarity here that at the end of the day the county has the approval on the final approval referenced in F as in Francis as compared to E in sign approval?
That is the staff understanding, yes, sir.
Okay. So if we, when we're done having this discussion here, move this forward to the board, you can bring that clarification there at the board and we can go forward. I too do not want this to come back to Hewlett. Okay, I want to move this forward to the board. And I just wanted to make sure it was your gut feeling that this particular issue he's raised can be worked out amicably between ourselves and the city. And there's not really an issue here. It's just clarification that needs to occur.
Yes, we can revise the language to reflect that.
Yeah, I can't say that I have any other objections to any of the language in the agreement. I haven't honestly had an awful lot of time to study it. It just, sort of a once-over to try to come up with anything like I just mentioned that looked like it might be a problem. The share of cost, the reimbursements for, damages upon termination and so forth all seem to be reasonably put together. I do want to say, and I'll defer to staff on this because I guess all of you need to know how you need to work together, but the item D, county requested park closure, the 15-day provision, I get it that doesn't apply to emergencies, that you can still close on an emergency under a very short notice. And I don't know if that was something that the city staff pushed you hard for, having a 15-day pre-notice for non-emergency closure. But I'm just hoping that's not a problem for you. I would tell you from using city parks, including Elm Rock, they don't abide by that on their side of the ledger with their parks. You walk up to the fence and you turn around and go the other way if there's a sign there that says, you know, doing temporary work on the park and we're not going to let you in today. You know, in city parks that are in fire areas, we think there's a fire hazard today. We didn't know that yesterday because of temperatures and so forth, so we're not going to let you in today. There's not a 15-day notice period to the public or anybody else that something's not going to be available over there. So it's a little bit of a double standard, and if you're comfortable with it and you feel like all we really need is, you know, emergency notice if we really need to go in there and do something serious, that's fine with me. But it was really the only other thing on my once over here that jumped out at me as potentially problematic at some point. It's a lot of sunshine to notice for a temporary situation. Supervisor Wasserman.
Thank you. In my closing comments on this before hopefully unanimously we move this forward, it's somewhere in my 200-page packet I recall seeing our Parks Director basically having the overall authority for any disputes resolving. Is that correct? I don't recall where.
Yes, that is correct. The sole arbiter of disputes.
Okay, that was something that was agreed upon with the city as well. So I just want to acknowledge the city members that are here. Thank you for your involvement in getting to this place. I'm very, very excited for the day when this opens up. And Supervisor, if you don't have any other thoughts beyond that, I'll make a motion to receive this and forward it on to the board.
Okay, and I'm happy to second that. And just before we close out on the motion, can we make sure that we have, as part of the packet going to the Board of Supervisors, just as a matter of reference, the naming protocol for the county itself? You know, last time I looked at it was when we were dealing with one of the clinics, I think out in Milpitas, and somebody had recommended naming a room after someone, possibly at BMC. I think we've done that a few times, and I know we have an adopted policy and a published protocol, and it would just be. It may or may not come up at the board meeting, but if somebody has the question, how do we deal with that? If somebody has a recommendation, we might as well have that material readily available as part of that packet going forward. That's the only request I have for now. Okay, thank you. Good work. Very thorough and comprehensive agreement, and I'm happy to support it going forward along with Supervisor Wasserman to the Board of Supervisors for any final comment and adoption that the full board has. Number 10, planning item. Recommendations relating to recreational vehicle park development in unincorporated Santa Clara County. 2 possible actions today. Did we have one on 9? I thought just 10. We do have speakers on 10, but no. And we can go ahead and, why don't we hear the overview?
Certainly.
I think that'll help inform the speakers in case they want to shape their comments any further, and then we'll go to the speakers and we'll come back to the committee.
Okay, Chair Cortese, Supervisor Wasserman, we have Manira Sand here, and Rob Eastwood are going to provide a PowerPoint that describes the RV study and what we're proposing to your committee.
Good morning, supervisors, staff, and members of the public. I'm Manira Sandhir, Principal Planner with the Planning Department. We're here to present the results of an RV park study that the department conducted, and also to share some of staff's recommendations as related to RV parks and farm worker housing. So just to give you a broad overview of our presentation today, we'll focus on, the impetus behind the project, what the RV park study includes, and the key findings that staff made, as well as focusing on farm worker housing and affordable housing needs in the county, followed by staff recommendations. So the RV park study was conducted because we have a general plan implementation measure, RLUI 6, that we have on the screen. The general plan was adopted in 1994. However, we have had a significant interest recently in the establishment of RV parks in the rural areas. We looked at our standards and we realized that the general plan included this implementation measure to evaluate at a minimum the changing role of RV parks in rural areas, look at maximum allowable densities for RV parks, establishing site-specific standards such as minimum parcel size requirements, limiting the total number of units in one RV park, impacts and implications of RV parks in rural areas serving as long-term, low-cost housing, and looking at proposing some mitigation measures to address impacts of RV parks. So as a result of this, recent interest, and given the implementation measure in our general plan, staff was uncomfortable with, these existing standards and wanted to review and understand better the role of RV parks in our county. So we looked at the existing regulatory framework. Our general plan allows for RV parks for the traveling public. So the general plan and the county zoning ordinance speaks to RV parks as a recreational use and specifies certain limits on how the spaces are used, and it includes percentages that no more than 65% can be used for over a month. 10% is the limit for up to 1 year, and does not allow for long-term RV park stays. The county zoning ordinance includes supplemental use standards, which includes some of those stay regulations. And then the county has development guidelines specific to RV parks in the roadside services areas that were also adopted in the mid-90s. RV parks are regulated at the state level under the Special Vehicle Occupancy Act, and under the State Department of Housing and Community Development provides for the construction and operation permits for such parks. So the entitlement process, the land use entitlement process, goes through the county, but eventually the construction and operation of such parks is overseen at the state level. Similarly, the septic permits for such parks, when they're dependent on on-site wastewater treatment systems, also goes through the state, through the water board, and through our two regional water quality control boards in unincorporated county. So we conducted an RV park study, and the methodology we used was to review the existing RV parks in the county, look at the density, the conditions associated with those parks, when they were established, what zoning are they located in, and how they're being used. We looked at case studies. We looked at other jurisdictions. What kind of standards are adopted by other jurisdictions? Do they have limitations on density or specific site standards or requirements for buffers or open space easements, et cetera? We reviewed the state and local requirements, and we conducted site visits and interviewed the operators of the RV parks. So the key findings of the study, and I've separated them out based on how they relate to housing and how they relate to density and appropriateness in the rural areas. So under housing, we found that the existing RV parks do provide for long-term stays. And typically, they're 1/3 of the park or higher are actually being used for long-term stays and are a source of housing in unincorporated county. One of the state requirements under the Special Vehicle Occupancy Parks adopted in 2004 actually allows for an exemption from local short-term stay requirements. And this exemption, if requested by an RV park, must be granted by an agency unless the agency can prove that there is a need for short-term RV spaces because of perhaps the demand of tourists that come to the area, or because there's a lot of traveling public that needs access to certain sites of, such as national parks or coastal areas. So this particular state requirement was adopted 10 years after our general plan identified that RV parks in the county are for short-term stay requirements. Under this exemption, if an RV park applies for this exemption, the county has to make substantial findings. Otherwise, we do have to grant that exemption, and that would allow an RV park to function similar to a mobile home park or as a residential park. The third key finding related to housing is that long-term high-density housing is inconsistent with our general plan policies. especially for our resource protection areas, the rural areas of the county, in the hillside areas, rural residential. It's not permitted in the ag ranch lands already, or in agriculture. But the allowed densities for residential use in these areas is typically 1 unit per 5 acre in rural residential, and 1 unit per 20 to 160 acres, depending on slope in the hillside areas. So there is a significant limitation on the kind of residential density that the general plan allows for in our rural areas. For RV parks, we looked at what are the densities of the existing RVs in the county, and we realized we have a wide range. Most of these RV parks are located in our hillside areas or in our roadside services areas, and the density ranges from 0.5 RVs to an acre to 13 RVs per acre. We had looked at other jurisdictions. Again, we realized there's a wide range of densities and standards across the state, and we even looked at outside the state to see what else may be out there. There are some counties that have minimum lot size requirements. They have buffer requirements from adjacent uses. They have site-specific or design standards, landscaping requirements. Some had an open space easement requirement. So there isn't really a best practice out there that other counties have adopted that could apply easily to our county, but there are other counties that do have additional standards that could be incorporated. And thirdly, we also found that the RV parks are typically not allowed in rural residential zoning districts of other jurisdictions. Having said that, the department has identified a need in the county that could potentially be met through the use of RVs and RV parks, and that's related to affordable housing needs for farm workers. Our general plan housing element and the Valley Act Plan, they all have policies and implementation measures that support the provision of farm worker housing in unincorporated areas. During workshops and in conversations with farmers in South County as a part of development of the Valley Act Plan, we have realized that there is a shortage of farm labor due to lack of housing. There was a story that was shared with us that, there were seasonal farm workers who were hired from out of county, and it took them so long to commute to the area that they just decided not to work for that farm, and a lot of the crop was lost because of that reason. And then the use of RVs to meet this need could potentially follow two models. So one could be a small scale on or off-site RVs located in the agricultural areas or the rural areas of the county. And the second potential model that could be employed to meet this need could be a larger scale off-site camps for seasonal farm workers in the form of RV parks. So to summarize, staff, as a result of this study and as a result of this efforts, realized that there is a conflict between the use of RV parks for long-term housing and how our general plan identifies rural residential densities. There is, however, a need to expand opportunities for farm worker housing in rural areas, and that need could potentially be met through the use of RVs. And the third summary is that we could potentially limit or restrict the areas for RV parks in the rural areas where there is a recreational purpose while expanding opportunities for farm worker housing using RVs. So staff recommendation focuses on these two different buckets. So if you were to look at short-term RV parks, staff recommends that they be allowed only in the roadside services areas and the hillside areas where they meet the intent of the general plan to serve as a recreational use for the traveling public, but not allow them in our rural residential or A1, which is our general use areas. And then identify appropriate densities and standards for the hillside areas so there is no impact, because our hillside areas is a resource area, and typically very low density uses are allowed in those areas based on the natural setting. And the second bucket we would like direction from Hewlett on to focus is on farm worker housing. We would like to propose that staff evaluate including RVs or RV parks as a farm worker housing option. We could streamline the process for the use of such facilities when used for farm worker housing, and create standards to prevent their misuse for providing other forms of housing. Staff did look at some other options when doing the study, and we just wanted to lay them out in case you would like to discuss these. So the first option is, given that state law subsequent to our general plan policies for short-term stay requirements could be used to create higher density housing, one option would be to not allow RV parks in any zoning district. The second option could be to limit it only to the roadside services areas, which are typically along our freeways and highways, where RV users and the traveling public could make use of those areas, and they cater truly to the traveling public. And the third option would be to maintain the current regulations. However, staff does believe that the third option presents significant challenges when reviewing new RV park applications, and given the changes in state law and their potential misuse. That concludes staff's presentations, and be happy to take questions and comments.
Okay, before we go to questions and comments, we'll hear from members of the public. We have, looks like 3 speaker cards here. Trina Hennesser, if she's still here, you can come on up. Scott Largent and Ken. All right, you're also welcome to come up in any order. Whoever gets the podium first among the 3 of you can speak, and you'll have up to 2 minutes each. Thank you.
Okay. First, I want to thank you guys for such a detailed report, and I know that there are several RV parks that are currently being proposed for South County, specifically for San Martin, and so my comments are primarily focused on San Martin, and I would really encourage this board to pay close attention to the changes that have already occurred with the zoning ordinance, being that the parcels are currently more easily subdivided, as well as secondary dwellings. So for our particular area in San Martin, when you look at the current population that we have, which is say 7,200 people, which is our current population, if you have two RV parks with approximately 30 acres between the two, the current ordinance that have just recently been passed in the last couple of years with the zoning, it would equate to approximately 16 homes. But right now, what's being proposed is approximately 450 RV plots. And if you were to have the housing increase in San Martin by those 450 homes, it would be an approximately 16% increase in our population, just like that. The residents of San Martin have really moved there to maintain those 5-acre parcels and live that type of lifestyle. So as you proceed to look at ag preservation and farm worker housing, I am a full supporter of that, as well as the San Martin Alliance is a full supporter of farm worker housing. However, typical RV parks are not restricted to only renting to farm workers. So those are some of the concerns that we have, where you can't designate them to only rent or verify that this is a farm worker. So please take into a lot of the consideration the elements that have changed in San Martin and the protections that we're requesting.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please. Welcome. You don't need that microphone. The podium's got one built in. Thank you.
Good morning, Supervisors Cortozzi and Wasserman. I'm Ken Murray. I'm a resident of Morgan Hill, and for the last several years been leading the economic development efforts for the Chamber of Commerce. During that time, I've spent a considerable amount of time understanding the issues with regards to water reuse, and I happen to believe that as an associated issue with this, that as we start to look at utilizing RV parks in the rural areas, the ability to accelerate the adoptions of rules and regulations as it relates to the NSF 350 on-site water recycling systems and pre-plumbing of homes and businesses so that the gray waters can be more effectively be reused would be strongly considered in these discussions. Pre-manufactured homes could also be ordered to be compliant with those kind of gray water recycling by putting their plumbing, and you'd be able to use that gray water for all its intended uses. The second thing I'd like to quickly state is that we clearly do have a very, very serious housing shortage, and it's impacting businesses. As a former CEO of high-tech companies here, I can tell you that this will impact our overall economy. You all know that. And I strongly believe that whether in cities or in the rural areas, manufactured homes and solutions like are being discussed are absolutely critical for us to consider in order to maintain the economic vibrancy of the community. So I would encourage you, because I think you are setting some standards here, not only for the county, but for other cities to follow, that you consider density. Higher density does lead to lower cost. I understand the issues related to it. And you also have to understand that because of the price of properties has such a significant impact on housing costs, what the role may have to be for the county in rural areas as we try to promote the whole county, including the cities and the rural areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here. Scott, come on up.
Good morning. Scott Largent, I was able to read the report in the back. It took me a little while there to kind of get up to speed. I've stayed in the loop of this transitional housing thing in a way. I know it's a little, I'm not trying to get too off topic. I like what the gentleman had to say that there's different, or I'm sorry, the lady, regarding stuff, if it's for homeless, if it's for farm workers, if it's for recovering addicts, there's kind of all those different scenarios. Some of the RV parks that I was trying to get into when my business first went under and I moved everything into a motor home, they were extremely expensive. It was hard to find a place to take them out. They were all full. And most of the time when I go to those places, you'd have a big, nice $100,000 RV, and a lot of people were just trying to save money because they couldn't afford a home. In my situation of really going through hard times, I couldn't get into any of those. So then what happened is I just bounced around from city to city, and that's not fun at all. And then eventually I got, of course, strung out on methamphetamines. That was even worse. It would have been great to have a place to go. I always used to talk about that with my friends on the street. If we had a place we could go and kind of get things back together, get into treatment faster. A lot of these zombies that are living in these motorhomes everywhere like that, if they were like I was, there's no way you can fix your motorhome. There's no way you can. Your mind is so fried on meth that they're never going to get these things moving. They're leaking fluids. The motorhomes they're falling apart, and these people are trying to survive. I mean, they need drug treatment, maybe a place to park the motorhome. My cousin, last week, he purchased this tent, and he bought this tent. It's about an $800 tent, and inside of it, it's all insulated, and he bought this backup power supply thing, and he's kind of the outdoorsman, but I was really impressed with it. He spent about $1,200 buying this whole setup, and it's nicer than the garage I live in right now. I was pretty impressed, so maybe those are options for the people that don't have motorhomes and cars. It was not very expensive, and they're disposable, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Public speakers? That concludes public comment on this item.
We have more speakers. I don't know if you have cards.
I don't have cards. Oh, I see. Okay, come on up. Come on up. You can just self-identify, and the cards are going to get here. One? Okay. Hi.
Hi. My name is Sharon Luna, and I am a resident of San Martin. I'm also a landlord and a landowner. And I heard a lot of talk today in regard to the homelessness and housing crisis. I haven't heard anything in regard to rent controls. So it is uninteresting for me to hear what we can do. But the real issue is, how much is being charged for rents for houses. In Morgan Hill, the median housing price is $800,000. What do you have to make a year in order to afford that? But my concern is when we're talking about with RV parks. Right now, San Martin has a severe water issue. We have been working for the past 14 months in regard to a 200,000 gallon sewer spillage from the Morgan Hill trunks that are at capacity. And we just have in fear in regard to what will happen if all these additions are put into our community. We are working, we have sent letters to Supervisor Wasserman in regard to the situation, and we're hope that we can work together in regard to solving this issue. But the real fear is adding more to an already taxed system within our area, and we in San Martin are the ones that have the brunt of all these sewage spillages that have taken place since 2005 coming over our area. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for being here. And Tom DiVittorio has submitted a card as well. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much for hearing me. My name is Tom DiVittorio. I own the Maple Leaf RV Park in Morgan Hill. I have operated that for 25 years, and I have seen the change between when I first started and what it is right now. First of all, really quick, I'm going to tell you the clients that we have. We have teachers that they are looking for a place to come in, whether it's not really permanently, but sometimes they say 2-3 years before they settle in the area. We have traveling nurses that the shortage of nurses here in the area. They import nurses from all over the country to fill the need that we have here. They usually stay until they have a place permanently to stay. We have, when we have an abundance of jobs over here, as it is right now for construction, we get people from all over the United States, and the RV service as not necessarily as a permanent situation, but if they have a contract for 2-3 years and they come in, then the contract is over and they go back where they come from, which it's a benefit to the local contractors to where they kind of have their job guaranteed, whether we have too much work or not enough work. So we also have teachers that they come in okay. I can't.
Well, you finish your sentence, Tom. Go ahead and finish your sentence.
But the need is there to have a place to where they come in when it's needed, and then they go back to where they come from. So.
Okay, thank you. We understand your point. Supervisor Wasserman, you have either questions or comments on the item?
I do. I have several of both.
Okay.
Thank you. First of all, full disclosure, there was a concern expressed to my office from individuals regarding the schools and the impacts with farm workers and other people that might come into and reside in the RVs, as far as that, an impact fee on the schools, something like that, where you add number of students without additional revenues. So that was something I just wanted to put on public record and get to you. If we can start with, I've got half a dozen items here, Supervisor Cortese.
Sure.
I'll just go in the order of the staff report. You mentioned in the beginning the general plan hasn't been updated in about 24 years. What we have done, at least in the 8 years that I've been here, is we seem to take little parts of it and update here and update there, as compared to where I came from before. And every 10 years, we did a general plan update, which I know your department has also brought up several times as far as doing that. So 24 years ago, I've been here for 60 years. We didn't have the housing crisis that we have now. So times are different now. What's interesting is the county, the role of the county traditionally has not been one to provide, I'll be talking to everybody here, but it's not been one to provide housing. in general. County historically has been it's obviously the unincorporated area, it's obviously more rural, but there are high-density unincorporated pockets in Los Gatos, the manor. So there are places within county jurisdiction that have high density, areas that have low density. There's, we talked about hillsides, we talked about rural residential, we talked about roadside services, but the times are different now than they were a quarter of a century ago. We're facing different issues. And the county has given has suggested to the cities to build more housing, build more housing. The state said build more housing, build more housing. We just passed a $950 million housing bond for the purpose of collaborating with individuals and organizations to create more housing. That's where we are now. I don't know where we'll be in 25 years from now, but I know now we're telling people create more housing. The taxpayers, by a 67% vote in the last election, approved $950 million to be used to create more housing. So I think this item is before us today, looking at perhaps potential ways where the county can participate in creating more housing opportunities. The one before us today is about RVs. As I move on to page 2 of the staff report, down in the bottom paragraph, it says there are no specific general plan policies or development standards for RV parks for the rural residential areas. And then I read the paragraph below that, and I kind of see a conflict between our zoning code and our general plan. Again, I understand that exists, and I understand the general plan historically rules, but we haven't updated the general plan in 25 years in this particular area. So I just want to point out within our own documents, not unlike what Supervisor Cortese pointed out earlier in our community garden document, where you can look at 2 different paragraphs and see a conflict. Continuing on to the next page, the first paragraph under A, it says the 1995 County General Plan recognized the changing role of RV parks in unincorporated county by calling for the preparation of a study related to RV parks in rural areas that would, among other things, analyze the impacts and implications of RV parks in rural areas serving as long-term, low-cost housing. Since 1995, the development pressures of the lack of affordable housing in the county have resulted in the use of RV parks intended for short-term stays to provide long-term affordable housing. Again, I'm just noting the change from 1995 to 2018. Although we recognized that in 1995, and although, was Don Gage on it back then? He might have been on it back then, maybe Supervisor Smitty on it back then. Although the called for the preparation of a study, I don't think we did the study back then. It's a study we've done now. So that's, you mentioned the state law point. And in the final paragraph on that page, we talked about the exemption from length of stay requirements became operative in 2004, almost a decade after the current length of stay requirements of the general plan were adopted. And again, we're talking about the state revision that says if we're going to require shorter stays, we must prove that that particular area has a tourist need, a requirement for shorter stays. Moving on to the third page, around the second paragraph that starts out with however. It says, however, in the context of affordable housing for agricultural employees, RV parks could further the general plan policies to promote the establishment of farm worker housing. I'm in favor of that. When you go down to the bottom of that page where there's numbers 1 and 2, 1 says small scale on or off-site units or RVs located in the agricultural area, and 2 says larger scale off-site. So one of my questions to staff would be, in 1, it talks about on or off-site small-scale RV parks, but in large-scale parks, it says off-site only, and it got rid of on-site. I've been to a few large-scale agricultural complexes, facilities, if you will, and when I think about them having the space and the desire to have RVs, and again I'm looking at number 2, large-scale off-site I'm talking about now large-scale on-site. I don't think we should rule out the possibility of large-scale on-site. I think if there's a large agricultural producer within their lands, if they want to produce what we classify as large-scale as compared to what we classify as small-scale, that should be considered. I think all of this should be case by case. The ability for, we've done the Santa Clara Valley Ag Plan. We've listed ag as a priority. We've listed housing. We've listed affordable housing specifically as a priority. So I don't think we should rule out the possibility for consideration of a large-scale on-site farm worker housing. Turning to the next page, just above where C starts, C, environmental issues. I think that's extremely important. One of our speakers mentioned the concern for the sewage, for the water. These RV parks being in the unincorporated may well have their own sewer-type system and not be connected to the sewer line. That's typically what happens in the unincorporated area of Morgan Hill running through. But I certainly agree with your point, C as in Charlie, on page 5 of 9, that environmental issues can drive the density and the size of a particular unit. You can have a piece of land here that can support 50 RVs, and a similar size piece of land over here that wants to have 50 because their neighbor got 50, but for whatever environmental reasons, perhaps proximity to water, whatever it might be, would not be appropriate. So I just think as we go through this process, Supervisor and staff, that we should be open-minded, because we issued a housing bond. 2/3 of the voters said we want to tax ourselves $950 million to fund housing projects. And I think the county needs to do its part as well, where appropriate. So again, it goes back to case by case. Under D as in David, under conclusions, item number 3, it says RV parks could provide a supply of short-term, long-term farm worker housing, which is one of your recommendations that you brought forward. I'm in agreement with that. However, I'm also in agreement with those people who are classified, and I'm sure the people in Montana and Oklahoma and Idaho chuckle at what we consider underpaid, but teachers. I've been a big proponent of schools. I've endorsed all school bonds. The better the schools are in a community, the less domestic violence, the less gang activity, the higher the home values. Schools are very important. I believe teachers are underpaid. As a result, the price of housing in Santa Clara County is very prohibitive. And for teachers to be able to live near the schools that they teach in is very, very difficult. And I'm sure it has cost our schools in Santa Clara County a lot of good teachers who couldn't afford to live and work here. So I agree with your recommendation about farm workers. I also agree, and I believe Supervisor Sumitian brought it forward, a proposed affordable housing complex that mostly has to do with teachers, perhaps in the Palo Alto area. I'm in favor of that. I think lower-priced housing for teachers, for nurses, for police, for fire, but especially for teachers, is something that we should allow, we should consider, we should pursue. And again, it's on a case-by-case basis. I'm not saying we make a rule and anybody and everybody, regardless of the size and location of their property, says, you made that rule, we get to do it. It needs to be case by case. Going on to package page 6 of 9, down to the bottom, it says short-term RV parks is the bold headline of the last 2 paragraphs. You've recommended in your report basically roadside and hillside. For myself, I think rural residential should be a choice case by case, okay? Again, it all depends on location, location, location. And I, for one, when I think about the county and the unincorporated areas, I'm not crazy about looking up on our rolling hills and seeing an RV park. So when I saw hillsides suggested and rural residential not, I have a problem with that. So I'm suggesting rural residential be included in part of that. But again, it's location by location. You have the roadside services. I get that. You know, there are RV parks. There were RVs originally designed for short-term stay, for tourists, for that type of thing. I get that. The idea of not having traffic go out into farm area, out into rural area, areas that are one house per 5 acres, I understand that. But I think what we're doing right now is, after 24 years, we're looking at tweaking what we have in the books regarding where we might consider allowing RV parks. And the reason we're doing this is because we're all acknowledging we need more affordable housing in Santa Clara County. So I think this report, I thank you for your Herculean efforts. I think this report is a good first step. And I think I will end it there. I covered all of my points.
What would you like to see done with it process-wise, Supervisor Wasserman, that your comments, from your perspective? I'll make a couple quick comments before we conclude. But
Sure. Process-wise, I would like staff to take under consideration the comments I made today, and of course, whatever you're going to make in a moment. I would like feedback on expanding beyond farm workers, those professions that make less income, specifically teachers. I think the idea of an RV park in an appropriate located area, again, legally, I don't know if we can say teachers only. I don't know if we're allowed to say that. I don't know if we're allowed to say veterans. I don't know if we're allowed to say law enforcement only. I would guess we're not. I would guess if somebody's a teacher and then retires, you can't boot them out. So I can see the problems there. But perhaps if we can focus on the affordability issue, so the RV parks can provide affordable housing to those that we classify as, that qualify, qualify as lower income, then I think we, the county, are providing an affordable housing alternative, as we're suggesting all the cities do, and as 2/3 of the voters with Measure A said we want to tax ourselves to do. I have to leave it that general at this point, Supervisor.
Oh, okay, I appreciate that. But
And
essentially,
rural
process-wise,
residential.
bring it back with some consideration of the additional, of the comments that are made today.
And including the rural residential as considered.
Right. So let me try to just bullet point my comments. I think they're generally similar to Supervisor Wasserman's, which is somewhat convenient, I guess, at least from the standpoint of some form of consensus here. But let me say, good work tackling and identifying the issues that we should be focusing on, because I do think that we need to be very, very clear in whatever we adopt and go forward with about the difference between short-term travel, parks, and land use that caters to that, which will probably long-term be continue to be through our valley and through these areas, county unincorporated areas. There'll continue to be some demand for that. I don't see any shortage of that activity going on, but the difference between that and longer-term uses, which I think are really where the debate starts about, do we want RV facilities to be used not just for transitional housing or tiny homes? We've talked about that in a separate context. But do we want them used for longer-term affordable housing needs of either certain communities or certain income levels? So I appreciate that. I mean, we need to be clear going forward that one is not the other, and they probably shouldn't be commingled, because if we're trying to regulate short-term RV parks and we're allowing mission creep to occur in those parks, by the owners, to where a significant percentage of the clientele, if you will, customers of the RV park are actually long-term residents. I think it's very difficult to apply the same regulatory scheme to both populations or both demographics on the same in the same park, in the same facility. I think we have operators that are probably doing a pretty good job of it, but trying to legislate that or regulate that's tough. And we should try to keep it a little bit separated. Clear. I think clear is the operative word there. I do think we also need to be very clear that whatever we do has to be careful not to conflict with the ag preservation work that we've already embarked on. And I don't know what that looks like. I think this may be more of a mapping exercise than what planning has engaged in, at least with us so far. You may have done some of that kind of work on your floor. People may be looking at geographically where might this be absolutely inappropriate because of ag preservation aspirations that we have, and where it might be, outside that area. It's almost, to me, at this point, like an FAA exercise over, flight zones. I mean, it seems like we need to at least look at where we have obvious conflict and where it should be more of a matter of discretion by the Board of Supervisors at this point, where they might allow either of these kinds of facilities, short or long term. And then the fair housing issues, and Supervisor Wasserman alluded to that when he said, I don't know what's legal. It strikes me that if we're just going to be in the zoning business and not be owners of or co-owners of these facilities, it might be really tough under the fair housing laws for the actual owners to have somebody walk up who's not a farm worker and say, you can't live here, if indeed we have a longer term facility. I know on the state books, and I know it frankly from a lot of work that my father did when he was in the legislature, that once you create permanent parks, people can move off the DMV rolls and onto the property tax rolls. And I think under most definitions, you're now dealing with something that the feds might look at as a housing opportunity, irrespective of whether that unit was once moving around on wheels or had license plates on it and now doesn't, or where it was manufactured or not. It's now housing, and I think we just have to be really careful about how we deal with that. It may be a lot easier. Again, I kind of heard a little bit of that in Supervisor Wasserman's comments, to just deal with it on an income basis and try to create some policy direction in terms of what our preferences are, that this type of low-income housing be marketed toward teachers, farm workers, and other demographics that we know actually exist. It's almost like preference point systems that we use, for other kinds of outreach action. I would like to see the United Farm Workers engaged as a stakeholder, because I think they could greatly inform the conversation about how much, what type and how much of this type of housing is needed and how appropriate it is, and they may even be able to help us survey their members. They're about to open up, after a long planning process, a Central Coast Farm Worker Center in Salinas, which is intended to be sort of a safety net center that is going to serve 4 counties, including ours, with the farm worker population. So in 60 days or so, they're going to be in an even better position than ever to survey their own members and maybe farm workers who aren't their members. So I would just imagine they have a lot of data on that subject. I'm not suggesting that this is a business versus labor discussion or anything like that. Just the fact that they have a captive audience and they can probably get us some relevant data and information. So I too am very open-minded, to use Supervisor Wasserman's words, on sort of an ELI, extremely low income use on a longer term basis than what you would typically see in a travel park, so long as it doesn't, and in my condition, which is in the report, but I'm not sure if I'm on the same page exactly as Supervisor Wasserman, but that we don't conflict with ag preservation priorities as those are going forward. Granted, we don't know exactly how our ag preservation plan is going to get adopted, where, who, when, how, and all that stuff is still up in the air. But a little bit of this is up in the air as well. And I think we have enough information to at least have you come back and tell us what your recommendations would be in terms of how to avoid conflict. So I hope that's somewhat consistent with Supervisor Wasserman's comments, because I felt like I agreed with a lot of what he said, and might help narrow our concerns for you a little bit.
I could start a little bit on one or two of those. I thought it might help to divide the world a little bit in two. We think we have on the farm worker housing side of the table, a great opportunity in terms of getting feedback from our farmers. I think great suggestion on reaching out to the farm workers themselves and getting their feedback. But we really see that acute need as something to own that came out of the ag plan, and knowing the season is coming up with the peak season. There's an effort we'd like to start as soon as possible at looking at our zoning ordinance, farm worker housing, streamlining, and just allowing that RV use for farm worker housing. So if it might help, there's kind of two discussions here. One is the world of farm worker housing regulations and owning and what the county do for that. And then there's just the broader affordable housing question. And I wonder if it just might help to sort of parse those into two. And if the HELA committee it provides the direction I'm suggesting for the staff to just start working on the farm worker housing ordinance and the streamlining and the actions that could support those uses, which will go through its normal planning commission board channels, because we would like to move on that fast. There's perhaps an opportunity for the first task force meeting in April to review that if we start work on it. And then ideally, we'd like to get those ordinances up and before the board, perhaps in the next couple months, just to meet that acute need.
Both of us need to opine on this. I'd rather, honestly, I'd rather see it all come forward together for the reasons that Supervisor Wasserman already stated, because I'm unclear about being perceived in any way as being overly focused on one particular demographic. But you make a good point, and I suppose if you're asking, are we asking you to hold back on, it may be a better way to frame the question, on trying to move forward and trying to build a farm worker housing ordinance for our review or rejection at some point in the next few months. I'm not one to hold you back from trying to give it your best shot. And if that's a recommendation you want to try to make to the full Board of Supervisors, I do think it's going to be hard to review that in isolation without people saying, but what about, and what about, and what about all these questions that we already raised today? How much of our space are we willing to use up for that purpose versus mixed populations? Even if you can do it under the fair housing laws, you still have this issue when you bring the ordinance forward, I think, is to what's that mapping look like, and how much are we willing to dedicate to just that one use, and how much will that impact folks who are trying to cater to mixed populations right now, for lack of a better way to put that. Supervisor Wasserman?
Thank you.
Stop him or let him go?
Thank you.
That's the question.
Sure. On the reference you're making, I'll go back again to the fourth page, small scale, on or off-site, large scale, where you say off-site only. So, Rob, are you referring to farm worker housing on-site? Are you referring to a couple of applications that we have before us that would be on-site? I think in my mind, there's a big difference between if farmer ABC, I won't pick any particular constituent, farmer ABC says, we'd like to have 25 RVs here on our property, okay, next to our warehouse, by the field, whatever, on our property, but current law doesn't allow for that because it would be a longer term stay or it would be whatever. Is that what you're referring to, or are you talking about approving a farm worker only type RV housing on the hillsides?
A little of all of the above. We see an opportunity right now. In farm worker housing, we have pretty much use permits required for any long-term farm worker housing and we just think that's a hindrance, knowing in all the ag areas. And what we'd like to do is look at some streamlining, and we know there's different models between the peak flows during the season, the long-term farm workers, small scale, large scale, all those models. I think what we're looking at is trying to streamline to the point where farmers can, at the small scale, in conformance to HCD rules, which has certain thresholds, allow RVs on their site with a much more streamlined permitting process than a use permit.
I'm with you in what you just said. You know, I'm interrupting for just a moment. What you just talked about was farm workers being allowed to have RVs on site via a streamlined process.
That is correct.
Okay, that all works. That works for me. Okay, and Supervisor Cortese, before I make my final comment, I guess I would turn to you. With you just identified that specific little niche, I would ask your thoughts on that before I move on to my second subject. Or I'll come back to you and I'll do my second subject, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I'm willing to let, planning. I trust that if they're sensing an acute need and an urgency to move forward, I hate to throttle that back because it's in general a good thing that they want to produce a more work product with more detail for our not only for our perusal but for a possible decision that might help some people soon. That's all good. I'm a little worried about the entanglement with the issues that we aren't deciding. And if you want to take a stab at it, knowing that you might get tripped up over the fact that you just don't have enough answers for where this is all headed holistically, your risk. I mean, I guess that's how I feel. We'll look at in good faith whatever you bring forward. That would be what this supervisor says. Just know that we're trying to take a holistic view of this. I think you heard that from both of us. We're not yet either of us convinced that we want to be as constrained in terms of locations as what you've said. And there are some areas where we might be much more quick to allow sort of instant zoning than other places where we might need some more things fleshed out. So like on people's existing property or farm or immediately contiguous, I would think. Having farmed, obvious situation you get into sometimes is I'm not going to interrupt any of my production to put a bunch of RVs out here, but the guy right next door to me isn't doing anything with his property right now. He'll lease it, for this year or the next 3 years, and I can put some housing there. So, I mean, the devil's in the details on this one. And I'm hesitant to even to try to be too prescriptive in terms of what we would do or not do. So if you feel like you have enough direction to, sort of assume the risk of putting all that hard work in and coming back, Supervisor Wasserman, that would be my take. Let them do it within all the comments we made today in the backdrop.
Okay, and with I agree with what he said, and with the understanding that whatever you do looking at that particular niche that you're looking at does not govern or mandate anything. I'm still interested in rural residential. I'm still case by case. I'm still interested in on-site, off-site. I'm still interested in lower income, and again, I lean toward teachers and public safety and all the rest. What possibility. I'm still interested in all those things that I brought up, the 8 or 10 items. But I do see the need. I also look at, Supervisor Cortese is born and raised in farming and agriculture. I married into it 38 years ago. If it is seasonal, there's people that come to work. The idea of somebody having to drive 2 hours to get to work for a low income doesn't make sense. Having something on site is what I'm in favor of. But I don't want to preclude that being off site. Okay, so I don't know how you work on all these things at the same time. We charge you with that. We just get to give direction to do that. So I'm looking forward to whatever you're bringing back. I'm looking forward also to the big picture. And that ties back, I think, to Supervisor Cortese's original comments about everything we're talking about are intertwined. They really are. And approving one thing, I don't want to automatically exclude another thing. I'm interested in the county participating in increasing the affordable housing stock in the unincorporated areas where appropriate, again, on a case-by-case basis. And I think you have that direction from me. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, again, devil's in the details. Whatever we did on the broader, painting with a broader brush, we wouldn't want the unintended consequence of folks who can afford, you know, something 3 or 4 times more to come swooping in and take up all the stock. As, you know, again, that's why the income issue may be, you know, like we do with our affordable housing in the first place. Standards that are based on median income levels and so forth might need to be installed. So the other thing, I'm sure you've thought about this because planning departments always think about this, but now that you've had this open public discussion and people have heard what these 2 committee members are saying and some of the direction, and it sounds maybe a little more broad than what you came in with, I think you have to give some thought to establishing some sort of a pipeline, you know, some sort of a demarcation as to when people can, you know, file applications that get heard under the new rules versus the old rules, because I don't want to rush on, I know you don't either, you know, based on the old rules, you know, I want people rushing the season, so to speak, and I don't want people rushing on what they think the new rules might look like, and just creating a big problem for everybody. So how we deal with that, we can look to you for that technical expertise as to how to establish something, and something that maybe protects people who are already, not only already in business, but perhaps already in conversations with you as to what they would do. So I'll leave that to you to figure out and come back to us with. So I think the answer to your question is you're welcome to take a stab at it and try to rush that first piece to us if you think you can deal with all the details.
We'll take that under consideration.
All right. When would you expect to come back, and do you need any direction, or would you just like that to be open-ended for now? I don't need, for building the work plan for the committee, we can just roll this as to when planning, you know, wants to come back, whether it's next month, whether it's every month for the next 3 months, that's up to you.
I know, just one question. I mean, next time we come back, just to what extent can the county and state rules parse farm worker housing from affordable housing? I know you're seeing the entanglements there, but it just might help inform the committee and the public when we do come back to sort of tease that out, and just to the way the county can regulate those different and make sure they're not intertangled. That seems to be a discussion point here. So just to disclose, we'll bring that back.
Yeah, we'd just directly ask council to, you know, accelerate whatever support they can give you in that regard, so that we're all moving together at the same speed here to try to get this done. All right?
Got it.
Thank you. Okay. We'll receive the report with that overall direction, and I think that concludes the final discussion and action item on the agenda, discussion and or action item, and the consent calendar was adopted earlier, so we're adjourned to April 19th, 2018 at 10 a.m. We'll start some of these discussions over again or pick up where we left off. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, members of the public.